Hey guys, it's Dave here. Welcome back. I hope you're having a good day. Today I wanted to go over a recent interview Peter Beck did because I thought there was a lot of extremely interesting parts, some stuff he said that I haven't heard him talk about before, and I figured I would just share the highlights with you as well as my thoughts on what he said. There's definitely a lot of interesting things talked about, but one thing I found extremely fascinating was Peter discussing the upcoming Starship by SpaceX. He really hasn't talked about it too much, and one of the biggest points of pushback I get whenever I talk about investing in Rocket Lab is, well, you know, SpaceX exists, so why bother investing in any other space company? And I do disagree with that for a lot of different reasons, and I was really just interested to get Peter's take on this. So definitely very interesting stuff. Before we dive into that, though, if you're new here, every subscriber is very much appreciated. If you're not new here, then every like and comment always helps out with the algorithm. Thanks so much, you guys. I will make sure to link the full interview down in the description below, so definitely check that out if you're interested in seeing the full interview. Give them a like and a follow. It's a very interesting channel. With that out of the way, let's dive into Peter Beck's latest interview where he discusses competition in the industry and the future of Rocket Lab.
Last week, May 9th, I think, you released the first quarter results. It would be great if you could talk us through the key points or key takeaways from that.
Yeah, no, it was a good set of results. Revenue was up and margins were up, which are important elements. And we continue to make really solid progress through all of our big programs. And then I would say we have probably this quarter or the last quarter we saw more defection from other potential launch providers than we've seen for a while. We generally see a little bit of defection in every quarter, but generally not multiple defections, and that was due to in large part one small launch company into bankruptcy and a number of other ones failed to deliver on previous kind of promises and milestones. So that was something to note of from that quarter. We had a couple of beats, which was great, and we continue to make really solid progress. Right throughout the whole business. All of the space systems businesses and everything. It had a really good quarter.
So I just found that interesting. Obviously, I did cover their Q1 results in a separate video. If you're interested in that, I'm sure you can check out my history. But I did think it was a great quarter overall. They did have a couple beats. Cash burn was a little bit higher than I was expecting, but overall a pretty good quarter. And I just found it interesting to hear him talk about all the defections they're getting from previous companies. Clearly there he's talking about Virgin Orbit employees coming over to Rocket Lab, literally just across the road from their old headquarters. And in fact, now we know Rocket Lab is taking over the actual headquarter building that used to be Virgin Orbit's. So some of these employees could very well just stay working in the same building, but now transfer over to a different company. Other companies he could potentially be talking about having all these defections could be Astra or Firefly. They've had some failures as well. There's definitely a lot of others as well. We all know that there's a big shortage in engineering talent in the market right now, so definitely good news for Rocket Lab to be able to scoop up some talented and experienced engineers.
Oh, main takeaway. Look, the market's horrible. We're executing, and just keep your eye on us and keep holding us, feet to the fire to make sure we continue to execute. Ultimately, my view is the markets are very efficient at working out who are the companies that execute and who are the companies that aren't. And it's a terrible time in the markets right now. But this is all cyclical. I'm not that old, but I'm old enough to know and old enough to seen a few cycles. So we just tell everybody and the staff and ourselves included just keep executing and creating real value through creating actual products and things that work and all the rest of it. And ultimately, if you build a real company with real value, then it's rewarded in a positive cycle.
This section was nice to see because he's really talking to the retail shareholders here. The question was around the current markets and obviously stock price for Rocket Lab and all the rest. And we do see him in a lot of, technical aerospace conferences talking about technology and all that kind of thing. But it's nice to hear him kind of talking to the shareholders and addressing the stock price as well as the whole market that we've gone through over the past couple of years. Really been horrible, but he still sounds pretty confident that Rocket Lab will rise to the top when we get out of this bear market cycle with the high interest rates and all the rest. Hopefully, once we start seeing those interest rates come down again, the growth companies in the market will start to benefit and outperform, and Rocket Lab will be the one that has been executing this whole time while the stock has been artificially suppressed.
The US launch range is really intended for a kind of high-value government customers, and the New Zealand range is just such a great range for doing high-frequency launch.
Yeah, I thought that little clip was just a little interesting because we've all heard so many benefits about owning their own range in New Zealand versus not owning the range in the United States, and they're the only rocket company that actually owns their own launch range. So the reasoning behind getting launch range in the United States is really for those high-value payloads, the government payloads, defense, and things of that nature. Definitely less launch opportunity in the United States, but more convenient for the government and Space Force and all those customers to be able to launch from the U.S. soil.
Recently, SpaceX made headlines around the world with the biggest rocket ever launched, Starship. It successfully launched, but then exploded soon after. So when it does get going, Elon has said they're aiming to get the launch cost down to around $10 million US. How stiff is this competition from SpaceX and what you're seeing when you think about that?
Well, at the risk of being attacked, my last comment holds true. Great ambitions, but I think that's starting to break the laws of physics in some sense. Look, you might get down to $10 million worth of propellant cost, but that's not what it actually costs to launch a rocket. The propellant cost on an Electron is a mere few percentage points of the total cost of the rocket. The real cost of launching Electron is the team of people that it takes to launch Electron. It's not even the cost of the rocket, the product. It's the cost of the team, and then the overheads of running all the launch sites and the factories and all that kind of stuff that actually, rolls into what actually it costs per kilogram to put something in orbit. So I think that was a little bit disingenuous to just take the fuel cost and say, well, that's what it costs, because that is not what it costs.
Yeah, so
to
this
launch a
is the
rocket,
clip that I
all.
found the most interesting. And as I said previously, whenever I talk to people about investing in Rocket Lab, the first response is, but Starship. And as if, Starship will just own the entire space industry and Starlink will just own the entire orbit, and there's no point in investing in anyone else, and we don't need competition, we don't need diverse companies and backups and things of that nature. So I'm not anti-Elon, and I know some people are, but I do think that when he talks about the Starship launch cost, he's talking about like a theoretical launch cost if everything goes to plan, basically saying that, okay, well, we're reusing the entire vehicle, so theoretically all we have to pay for is the propellant, and this is what it would cost. And that's just how he thinks and discusses things, but very much behind the scenes is that infrastructure cost, the factories, all the rest that Peter talked about, which is extremely pertinent and adds a lot to the cost of launch, in some cases even more than the actual rocket itself. So all those do play a factor, and that's one of the reasons why I'm pretty confident that there will be a market for Neutron. Even if Starship achieves full reusability, and I really hope they do as a fan of space and the sort of things that could potentially allow in the future in terms of satellites, in terms of a future space economy, traveling to different planets. I think it's all very exciting, but I do think there will still be a market for medium lift rockets or even heavy lift, but not super heavy in this case, that can carry more modest payloads when you take all those other factors into account, not to mention the safety and the heat shield and all these other things that are still up in the air, such as orbital refueling and all the rest. So really nice to hear Peter talk about it. I didn't think he really wanted to, address specific competitor rockets and specific competitors, but it was nice to hear him talk about it here, and a little comforting to hear that, I think I'm on the same page there from what he has said. And also, I think we all know that Elon is very aspirational when he speaks, talking about, when he thinks things could be ready, and always missing on the timeline and often missing on the cost as well. Even in terms of Tesla, the Model 3 X, S, Y, basically all of them ended up coming out for more than he originally said he thought they would sell for. And they're still very successful vehicles, don't get me wrong. I'm just saying, he's not always completely accurate on price or timeline. Very aspirational and very thinking theoretically what it could end up going for.
So Neutron is intended to be a similar vehicle to a Falcon 9 for customers to select. The Falcon 9 is an incredible vehicle, and it's been the industry kind of mainstay. But there's a lot of people that are looking for other solutions other than a Falcon 9, it's always good to have a little bit of competition in a market when one person's very dominant. And we really think that Neutron is a good solution to that, and a good opportunity to provide customers with a bit of launch diversity. So we continue to really lean into that, put our shoulder down, and really work hard to try and get that to the pad. But I would say that it's it is unashamedly designed to be a competitor to that class
potential
of
competitor to the next, I suppose. Now talking about the current most dominant rocket in the world, the Falcon 9, and when he said people are looking for other options other than Falcon 9, not exactly in those words, but it was something like that. The first thing I thought about was my previous video where I mentioned how I think Amazon is going to be looking for future launch capacity, and they seem to refuse to launch on Falcon 9 because, Jeff Bezos doesn't really like SpaceX and Elon Musk. So that was my first thought when he said, other people want a different option. And I do think, diversity in the market is good. We need competition to drive innovation and price improvement and all those things. Right now, no one's challenging Falcon 9 on price, so they can basically charge whatever they want. Now, if someone else comes in, they're going to have to start actually, having reasonable margins and challenging them on price, driving down the cost for the entire market, which is obviously good for the entire space industry. So definitely good to see more competition coming in, and I do remain hopeful on the future of Neutron.
Yeah, so I mean, if you look at the launch industry in sort of a 24 to 30 timeframe, or 26, depending on how ambitious you are, there's kind of a massive deficit in launch. You have a lot of mega constellations and spacecraft coming to market that are all requiring launch around that time frame. And you could take a very bullish approach and say, well, there's going to just be tremendous shortage of launch. Or if you take a very pessimistic approach, there's still a pretty tremendous shortage of launch. What we're trying to do with Neutron, and the reason why we went public, and one of the reasons we went public, and why we're trying to time it to kind of land in that end of 24 timeframe is that, like I said, in that sort of 24 to 30 timeframe, we want it to be there to service that the requirement for launch. So it's all kind of hands to the pump to try and get that vehicle there around about in that timeframe to take advantage of that opportunity. And quite frankly, one of the reasons why we didn't start developing it earlier is it wasn't clear that firstly there was going to be the investment in the spacecraft constellations as there has been, and it wasn't clear when that demand would hit. But the moment it was kind of clear, when all that came into focus, then we knew that we had to position ourselves with a product.
So from 2024 to 2030, there's going to be massive demand for launch. And you did mention previously Amazon's Kuiper constellation. I did a whole video about why I think Neutron would be a perfect fit to launch some of their satellites. That constellation needs to be launched from 2024 to 2029, so that fits right in that timeline. But it's not only them. There's a ton of up-and-coming companies that need launch. I'm thinking of, the Redwires, the Terran Orbitals, the AST Space Mobiles of the world, even, Intuitive Machines just went public recently. There's a ton of up-and-comers that are going to need a lot of satellites. I mean, I can't even believe I didn't mention Planet Labs, but they're going to be in there for sure. A lot of new companies. So definitely no shortage of demand. And I really hope Neutron doesn't get delayed significantly. The timeline is very tight for when all this demand is happening. And if they're 5 years late, then unfortunately they may miss a lot of the launching of these various constellations. So, timeline's tight. Hopefully the acquisition of the facilities and machinery and that sort of thing from Virgin Orbit helps ensure that they do hit that late 2024, early 2025 timeline for their first launch, and as well as, keep up a decent cadence after that.
Yeah, so as we're going through and developing the vehicle, we're making sure it's human rateable as opposed to being human rated. And the difference there is like classrooms of paperwork. But it gives us the ability to have to not go back and redesign stuff, which is important. So gotcha. At the moment, the way I look at this is that there's really only one customer for human spaceflight, and that's NASA. And that customer is actually pretty well served right now. You've got SpaceX, obviously, and then you also have Boeing with their Dreamliner when it comes on, Starliner, I should say, then when it comes online. So you got one customer with two providers. It's pretty tough to make a business of that. So our view is that there will be a lot more commercial human spaceflight, but until there's more than one customer to serve, then we'll just kind of hold our powder dry. We're ambitious and forward-looking people, but it's okay to take a risk on your engineering. It's not okay to take a risk on your market. So we'll wait until we're really, really sure that there's a market there, and then we'll go and execute against it. But I think to go into human spaceflight right now, given the size of the customer base, would be
NASA's the only one launching astronauts with any regularity. We are starting to see that come along, though. We've got the Jared Isaacman launches where he is, a private astronaut going on SpaceX's Dragon capsule. We've had a few others starting to come along. We've had, some private visits to the International Space Station. There had been talk previously about even, filming scenes there for a movie. I seem to remember talk of Tom Cruise going up to the ISS. I don't know what happened to that, but it does seem like the market for private spaceflight is starting to expand because, if it's just NASA, probably don't need a third provider there. And we also have a lot of planned commercial space stations for, 2030 and beyond. There's Axiom, there's the Orbital Reef. I actually want to make a video soon on future potential commercial space stations. So that's very interesting, and I do have high hopes that there will in the future be more customers than just NASA for a capsule. I wonder when the right timeline would be to start working on it. I feel like it might be pretty soon because these things can take like a decade plus to develop. So if these future commercial space stations do end up being real, maybe the time to start working on a capsule isn't that far away. Let me know what you think down in the comments below.
So the very first Electron doesn't look much different to like the 35th Electron. They look kind of the same product. Whereas a lot of companies will tend to, rush a product to market that's kind of a beta version full of, lots of problems and errors, and then, aim to kind of address it later. Well, in this industry, you don't really get the chance to address it later because you consume so much capital and time. Excuse me. That's really, really challenging. And, it also becomes a point, as I mentioned before about being a first mover, where you build enough heritage that, because, look, heritage in this industry is everything. When you pour your capital and your life and your soul into a spacecraft, the last thing you want to do is take risk on getting that to orbit. So, Electron and the team have established themselves at building a very reliable vehicle, touch some wood, and customers can rely on us getting their spacecraft to orbit. So even if a new entrant comes in and offers a ride 20% less, nobody has a desire to do that. To get up to 30 flights of heritage, it's going to take a lot of capital and a lot of time for anybody else to kind of get there. So it's like I say, this is an example where being a first mover is a huge advantage, and the cost to shift to something that's unproven is just doesn't trade very well. So
just talking there about the small sat launch market with Electron and the potential for future competitors to come and disrupt it. There are still some small companies working on small launchers, although a lot of them have moved on to medium and heavier lift. But he makes a good point. If you're building a $25+ million satellite, you want to launch it into orbit. Electron goes for about $7.5 million a launch. If a new competitor wants to come in and disrupt them, even if they offer to sell the launch for around $5 million, which is what I believe Astra was originally selling their Rocket 3.3 system for. So you're saving $2 million, but you're risking a $25 million satellite being destroyed or not reaching the proper orbit on an unproven vehicle with not a lot of flight heritage of success. Not a proposition a lot of companies want to do. Even if they do get insurance to ultimately cover their losses, the opportunity cost there is massive. If you're a small company, it's absolutely devastating if your satellite doesn't reach the proper orbit. I remember even Facebook, they were launching a massive satellite on a Falcon 9 several years back, which had a problem and didn't end up reaching orbit. And even that was extremely difficult for them, and they're a massive company. So if you're launching for a smaller company, it's even more devastating. That's one of the reasons why I think Electron doesn't really have much to worry about in the small sat dedicated launcher space. Now, of course, the rideshare competition is a whole nother conversation there.
Yeah, so Varda's an interesting one. So they came to us. They have a pharmaceutical factory, basically, and they built a capsule, a re-entry capsule. And they came to us and said, "Look, we need you to build a spacecraft that will host our capsule, feed it with power and thermal, and keep it at the right temperature, and then we want you to re-enter it and target it to land in a desert, and we'll go and pick it up." And they're looking for various crystal proteins that only grow in zero gravity for drug research. So pretty unique spacecraft. The spacecraft in its own right has a whole bunch of, we call it delta V or energy, to enable to re-enter and re-enter accurately. And our job is, as I mentioned before, is to keep the factory fed, but also to accurately target that thing and land it in a desert. Which is a non-trivial piece of guidance, navigation, and control work that our team have managed to pull off. So that's launching here shortly, which will be exciting, and then re-entering shortly, which will be so exciting. And you might say, well, why would Rocket Lab do that? I mean, it's cool, that's good, and obviously it's a profitable program, otherwise we wouldn't do it. But for me, it was like, well, if we are ever going to do a human-rated capsule, I'd much rather learn on these smaller programs and really get that perfected with all the GNC, where we have a lot of tolerance, for its landing position, as opposed to a human capsule where you have very little tolerance on your landing position. So it was a great opportunity to also build that capability.
This one again, I thought was really
for
interesting. I have
programs.
been following the upcoming Varda mission. If you're not familiar with it, it will be using a Rocket Lab Photon, and it really never occurred to me that having to re-enter the product, in this case, I believe it's pharmaceuticals that Varda is manufacturing in space, is a lot like re-entering a little mini capsule that, could hold astronauts. You have to worry about the temperatures, you have to re-enter properly. So it does kind of give them a little bit of experience with re-entering in capsules and things of that nature before they eventually go on to the big real thing with actual humans. Definitely very interesting. And I also do find the whole space factories concept quite interesting. So I plan to make a future video on that, the potential applications of these space factories, whether it's fiber optics or pharmaceuticals and these crystals. Love to see it, and I do hope there's more business for Rocket Lab in the future from Varda and space factories.
Well, I mean, I should preach on a couple of things there. So,
Do that.
firstly, yeah, no, that's cool. We had a Mars window May this year, but this is a philanthropic nights and weekends project. We have a number of science teams that are supported by philanthropists and also internally to Rocket Lab. This is, like I mentioned, a nights and weekends project. So real work always takes precedence. So the best Mars transit window for this year was actually occurred right about now. So we'll be targeting a 2025 launch date, which correlates to the best transit window again, which buys us a little bit more time. This is, as I mentioned, this is a philanthropic non-profit mission to Venus to search for the clouds for using a nephelometer to see if we can measure trace elements of phosphine. And the reason why that's important is because if you can do that, then you can prove, if you were so lucky to find these particular organics, then you would conclude that life actually is on Venus, and it's in this very narrow band of atmosphere. And I think why that's important is because if you want to take the scientific method, then in the kind of absence of any evidence right now, as far as any human is concerned, we are the only life in the universe. Now, I think that's probably not true, but like I say, when the absence of any evidence, if you could find life on another planet, I think that would be kind of interesting. And then if you found it in Venus, you would also conclude that it's probably quite prolific throughout the universe, and I think that would also be super interesting. So so it's basically repurposing all of the old qual and test gear from our Capstone mission to the moon. So when we built the Capstone mission to go to the moon for NASA, we basically had to build 2.5 spacecraft. So we're taking the 1.5 left and putting it all together.
The Venus mission is very interesting.
Mission.
I am supportive of it, even though as a shareholder it's probably not a profitable mission. I think the search for life beyond Earth is extremely fascinating, and it's definitely, a technology demonstrator. You're sending their Photon spacecraft with an instrument to another planet, something they've never done before yet. They have done it to the moon, but not to another planet. So, it could show the power of electron and photon. And the other thing to note is I didn't really realize they had leftover hardware from that Capstone mission to the moon. So that probably helps with the costs, and maybe this launch is not as expensive as previously thought. By the way, I did make a video on this Venus mission. I found it completely fascinating. If you want to check that out, you can check my history for that video.
Yeah, like one year at Rocket Lab is like dog years. I think it's 9 years everywhere else. So to ask me to look 10 is a long way, let alone 20. But what I would say is, my view and our view is that the large space companies of the future are companies that will have launch, and they'll build satellites, and they'll be a one-stop shop. And the reason why I think that's true is because a rocket is a giant compromise, a giant engineering compromise, and a satellite is a giant engineering compromise. When you have your rocket and your satellite, and you can compromise those two things together, you get a far better solution and far better result. And being vertically integrated, and having the ability to deploy infrastructure in orbit almost at will, is a very, very strong position to be at. So, who knows what it looks like in 10 or 20 years, but my view is that the large space companies will be companies that have
So that one I thought was interesting. I'm currently in the process of researching Planet Labs and very interested in investing in that company, but they don't have launch. So this does make me think about that, and I do agree, obviously, launch and the whole spacecraft manufacturing business is a very powerful combination. Just look at what SpaceX has been able to do with their Falcon 9 and Starlink. Starlink is looking like it's going to be a cash cow in the very near future. The user growth on that is quite impressive already. So if the largest space companies of the future are both launch plus space systems manufacturing, all of it vertically integrated, how does that make you guys feel about other space companies you're looking at investing in or may invest in, whether it's a Redwire, Terran Orbital, AST Space Mobile, Planet Labs, or any of the others? I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that. Planet Labs does seem to have a pretty good business model, and at least as far as I can tell, are on the road to profitability. But then long term, not having launch, will that hurt them? I'm not sure yet. I'm not sure. I'm still thinking about this for the future, but I do think for Rocket Lab, having both space systems and launch will be an extremely powerful combination. So that's it. I know it was probably a long video. They kind of always are when I cover the Peter Beck interviews. There's just always so much that I find interesting, but hopefully I did distill it down to the most interesting points for you. And again, the link to the full interview will be down in the description below. I definitely encourage you to check it out and support that channel as well. So let me know what you thought was the most interesting from the interview. How do you feel about Starship and Neutron? How do you feel about the future of space when it comes to a capsule? When's the right time for Rocket Lab to develop that themselves? And do you think other space startups that don't have launch still have a bright future, or do they have a tough road ahead of them? Let me know in the comments below. This might be one of my favorite Peter Beck interviews I've seen so far, so I hope you guys enjoyed it as well. I hope you have a great week. Thank you so much for watching. Subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.